We kind of always set out to use psychology and coaching to have this kind of systemic impact on our clients.
Okay.
That's really what differentiated us from lots of the other providers that started coming into the marketplace.
Hello and welcome to Voices with Talking Talent, the podcast that explores the real issues people face in the workplace. This is a space to have the open and brave conversations that inspire change and spark action. We're Talking Talent, and every week we'll be joined by a different guest. Stay tuned for discussions on the issues that business leaders are trying to overcome and what the future looks like for truly diverse and inclusive organizations. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at Talking Talent. I'm super excited because we have our very own CEO, Mr. Chris Parke, joining us. Very frank conversation. It's really all about, what it's like being the DEI expert and white and coming into the room and what that looks like from that other perspective. So I'm super excited to have this conversation. Welcome, Mr. Chris Parke. How are you today?
Thanks, KK. Yeah, all good. Thank you. Yeah, excited about this interview.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, when I was asked to do this, I thought, this is going to be interesting. This is going to be, to put yourself out there, to be vulnerable, I think is very powerful, especially in our industry. Again, thank you from all of us for taking the time out of your very busy schedule.
Of course.
I want to jump in there. For those that don't know Talking Talent, tell us about Talking Talent and what your mission is.
We've had a kind of vision and mission of inspiring inclusive cultures where people and business can thrive. So Talking Talent is a leading ED&I practice. We come from a heritage of executive coaches and really we work with some of the world's leading organizations to help them either define their D&I strategy or execute it. And for us, that then means working with leaders to help build inclusive cultures or working with some of the key talent within those organizations, particularly diverse talent, to help them realize their full potential. So for most of our clients, it's about, how do we build a really diverse pipeline right to the top of the house? That's what we're trying to achieve, which is, sometimes easier said than done, as we all know.
Absolutely. How long has Talking Talent been doing this? And let's take us back to the start. How did you come about? Was it all about diverse talent, or tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So actually I co-founded Talking Talent 16 years ago with Jo, my wife. And Jo and I were working for a small coaching practice in London. And one of the things that we observed was that when we were working again with some of the kind of FTSE 250 organizations, there was this real difference in experience of some of the brilliant women that we were coaching from, the really talented men. And we felt that difference was more defined by how the system treated them and what some of the policies and practices and culture were within organizations that we were working with, which kind of prevented those individuals from realizing their full potential. So it became a bit of an obsession of Jo and I's, and we observed it, we talked about it a lot, and we really felt that there wasn't anything particularly creative going on in the market at that time, using business psychology and executive coaching to kind of help break that down. And that's what led to us starting Talking Talent.
So what I know, because I work here, you went from women, and then because you saw that there was that hole in the business world, right, supporting women, and then you went a step further, and then you went into kind of family, paternity, maternity leave. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, actually, do you know what, KK? It was the other way around to that. So we started originally looking at that working parent transition. Because we could see that one of the major challenges women were facing was that transition to parenthood. And organizations just were not handling it well at all. Women were having very mixed experiences, largely dependent on how emotionally intelligent and locked in the line manager was.
Right.
And so we could see that was already one of the stages in a woman's career that we could really influence positively by dealing with their experience, but also upskilling line managers and changing some of the kind of policies and practices around that. So that then we kind of got a reputation as being fantastic coaches for working mothers. We translated that work into looking at all working parents because we could see that it was a gender neutral issue. And then we extended into looking at women's careers more broadly. Now, how can we develop the next generation of female leaders?
Right.
And then it evolved into looking at the system more broadly. So what is it we can do to really affect this systemic change that we want to see? So it's not just a kind of flash in the pan, that it's constant and embedded culture change. So we started our ED&I practice. And of course, as you know, 3 years ago, we started looking at moving into other diverse talent programs, including race and ethnicity. So that's how the practice has evolved.
And so that sounds to me that it was just this natural progression into going into the ED&I. It's like when your eyes are open, you suddenly, it expands, the view expands. And that's what it sounds like you and Joe really took stock in.
Yeah, we kind of always set out to use psychology and coaching to have this kind of systemic impact on our clients.
Okay.
That's really what differentiated us from lots of the other providers that started coming into the marketplace. And so to be authentic to that, we really needed to have an ED&I practice, because one of the major frustrations for us after a few years was that we were delivering these really detailed, deep, systemic reports, which were observing what was getting presented during the coaching sessions. What we saw was getting in the way of progress. And oftentimes, the HR functions really just didn't know what to do with that, or the culture change ensuing from that was quite slow. So we then started to challenge ourselves to say, okay, well, how can we accelerate this? We need to get into senior leadership layers, and we need to start operating more strategically and more from the top down. And so that's how that kind of evolution came about, more from Joe and I's frustration as much as anything else, really.
That takes me to, so here we have this journey, and then we're seeing change. Now, here you are, let's deal with it, right? You're this white guy in this ED&I space in a coaching firm that's all about inclusion. I really do want to know, because when you and I had one of our first conversations, we touched on this. It's like, what does that feel like to go to these major corporations? Because Talking Talent works with incredible brands. And so how does that feel like when you're trying to say, hey, we've got an inclusion coaching program for your diverse talent and your middle leaders, senior leaders who, what's the response? I mean, I hate to giggle here, but as a Black woman, as a Black American woman, I can't help but be honest here. I have my biases when a white guy is starting to talk to me about diversity and inclusion and equity. I'm like, I'm listening. So what is the response? And I should say I'm listening, but I'm pushing back a little bit too. Right? Because I'm like, how do you know?
Good for you.
How do you know what we're going through? Tell me what that's like when you're out there saying, hey, come to us.
No, for me personally, it's been a really interesting experience. I now talk quite openly about, looking back, how challenging and difficult I found some of the earlier years of running the business, because at that point I was dealing with, predominantly I was going to conferences, I was asked to go and speak for client organizations, and I was quite often one of the only men in the room, if not the only man.
Okay.
And, I remember when Joe was going through some of her maternity leaves, we started the business 3 months before Lottie, our eldest, was born. And then we had 2 other girls really quickly after that, in a 3.5 year time frame. So I was quite often fronting some of these sessions as the kind of lead coach, coaching women through this maternity transition. So I could really sense in the room this kind of surprise. Okay, what's a guy doing talking to us about how to navigate maternity? What's a white man doing turning up and speaking on the podium about gender diversity? It did feel quite a strain.
In what way?
I think, I recognized that was in the room. Sometimes I think that probably said more about me than it did about the audience, but it was definitely there. I think some of that was this, this strong sense of feeling like, an imposter, wondering whether I was going to be listened to as the minority in the room, which is ironic, isn't it, given practice? And so, I was able to kind of, in a way, turn that around and say, well, look, Chris, you're experiencing exactly what women experience or other minority groups within organizations experience as part of being a single individual within the majority,
Right.
Or someone who is not in the majority. So that was a really useful learning experience for me, and it felt very uncomfortable.
And that's what brought me to that. The next question is, so this is this uncomfortable feeling. However, you still have to keep showing up. You have 3 children coming all around the same time. You're still having to take these leads. You're still having to show up. So it's like the Black person going into the organization that's predominantly white, having to show up. And there's a certain level of a burden that one carries, or you feel there's this like, what is people thinking? What are people thinking of me? Go a little bit deeper in that uncomfortable feeling. And how long were you carrying that uncomfortable feeling? And do you still carry it today?
Well, I think what it meant was that when I was standing up in front of the audience, oftentimes I would be probably holding back what I wanted to say because I was afraid of how that might be received.
Right.
And so to an extent, I wasn't being, my true authentic self. There were definite things that I was observing about the ED&I space and how it was being approached that I just didn't agree with. And again, I think I was just playing it a bit safe during that time. I think also, where it was really comfortable is, I used to have a lot of people coming up and saying, it's absolutely terrific that we've got a man who's talking about gender diversity and is a champion and a sponsor and an advocate. It was those moments when I used to have, individuals who come up and say, well, why are you here? What are you doing as a speaker at a gender diversity conference? That, where there was a slight frisson on edge. It was that kind of pushback that you were saying that you have sometimes when you see a white man championing ED&I. Some people can't help that, and I think understandably that's coming from a place of frustration because they associate you as the majority, the person who is creating the system that is
the oppressor,
is an evil. Maybe the oppressor. I mean,
for gender as well, we have to acknowledge that. That's how for women looked at at men, and that's that pushback. It's like, you stopped us from getting the same amount of money, the same opportunity, right? So unfortunate that is what it is. Can we move on into kind of talking about that ED&I piece, and now what that is like for you in the space and what you're trying to achieve? And I guess really what I'm talking about is allyship. So it's clear you've become an ally to women. What is that shift like? It's so, when you think of women, you could see your sister, your cousin, your mom, but when it comes to, say, ethnic, let's say, diversity, right?
Yeah.
You and I are clearly different. What is your goal here around this allyship? What are you hoping? I guess really what I'm looking for the answer for.
I think within that, I think there's a really important part. So I want to link this to the conversation we've just had. I think I see part of my role as this kind of white middle class guy who looks and sounds somewhat like the majority within leadership positions. There is a role as an advocate and as a kind of role model for that. And I think, you used the kind of vulnerability piece. I think there's a really important piece here in leadership anyway, regardless outside of this conversation, where, leaders are really powerful, I think, when they show vulnerability.
Absolutely.
And when they say, look, I don't have all the answers to this. And, we need to have a discussion about this. We've got some good people in the room that can work this out, but the solution isn't going to come from me. Right. I need your leadership here too. So I think that vulnerability is really key in demonstrating to other people in the majority, look, this does feel uncomfortable. You know, you've got to get comfortable with your discomfort. That's all part of this process. And that's pretty natural.
Yeah.
And, you know, you won't have all the answers, and that's not what we're expecting. But we are expecting you to kind of move from this fairly passive place of support, this kind of vocal agreement and support, to something that's a lot more active.
Yeah.
How can you start taking the stage? How can you start actively talking about this in open forums? And how can you start behaving in different ways and picking others up on how they're behaving, so that you're going to role model, but also, you know, stepping in when you can see language that's used or behavior that is inappropriate.
Right. That leads me to, you know, that's true advocacy. There's the ally who says, yes, I stand for you, but you're really talking about that advocacy. And that's really standing up. That's truly standing up. That's definitely uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we move from that progression of a kind of a passive ally, I'm supportive of this, to something that is more advocative, because unless you see that progression, you're never gonna get culture change. It's just not gonna happen.
Right. Is there a place to kind of recognize privilege, or, you know, the term white privilege? It sounds like there's a place inside of you that recognizes that you do have that privilege. Do you think leaders should white leaders, we should say, should kind of self-acknowledge that?
Well, I think, you know, I think this is about understanding context and personal circumstance. We all have our own backgrounds and experiences. And, you know, I think it's helpful to understand that, you know, you have certain benefits from the color of your skin, or the background, or the education you've had, or the geography of where you come from, the accent you have. You know, there are all sorts of kind of ways that we experience that, or otherwise. I think it's part of the importance of being a leader to explore that, know thyself before you lead others. You know, I advocate for. You know, I think there is a kind of interesting thing for me around the language that we use as ED&I professionals. And, you know, for me, again, one of the things that I experienced moving into this whole space was just how much, you know, technical language there is, and how emotive that language can sometimes be. So again, it's an important point, because I think it does put people off. It does scare them away.
Right. What's some of that language?
Well, you know, for example, white privilege is a good label to explain something. But I also wonder how some of the language we use within ED&I, microaggressions is another one. You know, it's a good descriptor.
Yes.
But if we think about it, if we break that down, you're using microaggressions against me, Chris. You know, how does that make me feel? It's already putting me into a defensive space, and so we just need to be really cognizant of that.
Absolutely.
And I'm a strong advocate for using plain language, and, you know, trying to think about language that is not going to create an emotive response.
Right. I think what it is. So when I think of like that word microaggression, you know, like you said, it makes you defensive already. And then the shame of it all is, with defense, we're literally putting up a wall. We're putting up a wall, and then we don't hear, we don't see, so we can't break through. And I think you make a very good point in the language that we're using societally, and even in for some in trainings. I don't want to come to the session when I hear that. It doesn't make me curious. It means I'm going to be pointed at and looked at as the bad guy, when I'm a good guy. It's like I'm not like that. And that's a shame. I don't know. I think there's something important with the language too. There's something, so when we can look at the language, as difficult as and uncomfortable that language is, I think it's important. In one way, it's helped society right now to feel the potency of what we have gone through. people of color, people with neurodiverse, people with, disabilities, the language has had such potency on us, right? That these words, in one way, as much as they are hard, they're also soft, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, well, you're making a great point. So what I don't advocate for is pulling punches. We're this, KK. We're always having extremely difficult conversations with our clients, with the leaders within clients, with the line managers, and sometimes with the talent themselves. So I'm not advocating for that at all. You need to go to difficult places. I think it's about, for me, how do you create psychological safety?
Yeah.
How do you accelerate to a place where we're able to have really open and honest conversations about how I experience your leadership style, Chris, how I experience your senior team, how do I experience day to day coming to work and working for this organization, for this function, for this team, for you as a leader. And until we can have those safe, honest conversations, progress is going to continue to be incredibly slow. So I'm not advocating for in any way stopping us from grasping the nettle or putting our hand in the fire. We need to do that, but we need to do it in a way that is mindful of how people are feeling when they enter the room.
Right. Absolutely. I like that. Mindful of how people are feeling when they enter the room. That is so important. We can conversate about that all day long. That brings me to a question. Well, I guess we're kind of talking about it. This is really about fear. It's about the fear of what you're thinking of me, or from a historical, or maybe most recent in a person's experience, but what I represent as the white guy in the room talking about DEI. It's like there's a fear there, that's going on, and it makes me think of the psychological safety piece. It's like the language creates fear and uncomfortableness. There's so much fear going around. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, it's been a tough couple of years, and let's say a tough year when we're talking about from George Floyd murder, Black Lives Matter. There's been a lot of fear, and there's been so much going on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I think the point you raise is really, really important. So even before the tragic circumstances of last year, when we went through the whole Me Too movement, I observed individuals who, particularly men who were coming along to our inclusive leadership sessions for our clients. There was an increased level of fear and a lack of safety, because increasingly they were terrified about doing or saying the wrong thing. Now, to an extent, it was a positive thing, because it makes people more consciously aware of what's happening again within the system. It makes them going to question their behaviors and actions, the language they use, all these things. But overplayed, the pendulum then swings into a place where actually they avoid having conversations, and they avoid moving into, from positive intention to action, because they're terrified of doing and saying the wrong thing. And I think that's where it ended up. So we were having to work even harder within some of those sessions to then bring it back center and create this safety. And I think exactly the same thing happened around race and ethnicity when the Black Lives Matter movement got this enormous momentum behind it after George Floyd. People who were already finding it challenging to discuss race and ethnicity because they didn't have the vocabulary, they were feeling unsteady about whether they were going to put their foot in it and say or do something wrong, became even more withdrawn. Again, as professionals in our space, we took very seriously the job of working even harder to create this safety. How do we have a conversation around race and ethnicity?
Isn't it interesting? We had the Me Too movement, which was on one hand a very good thing. It stopped bad behavior. But then I was carrying on. I was doing a number of maybe about 30 or 50, about 30 sessions, and it was around behavior. Let's talk about major corporation. And the pushback in those conversations, it was we can't say anything now, and these are like middle senior leaders, and they were very fearful of saying anything, of even complimenting a woman, open the woman's door for her. It was this type of conversation. It was, one man said, I met my wife at the company I work for. What are you going to do? Lock me up now and it was really interesting to get that as a woman in the room saying, hey, let's look at behavior, how we can change behavior for a modern time. And it seems here we are, we brought into, now we're looking at diversity and the injustices around that in the corporate space, right? In society, in the corporate space, as we speak today. And it's very interesting because, again, it's kind of going back to the conversation. It's the uncomfortable. We're dealing with, I guess maybe it's almost like the beginning stages of dealing with that discomfort. So hopefully what I'm thinking we'll see a smooth transition of, okay, now we have changed behavior, because as we know in our world that we do, change is incremental. It takes time. We've just been pushed forward very quickly in both those arenas, and we'll see the same thing in the kind of health and well-being space in the coming year or two. I wanted to ask you, are there any books that you've read to kind of inform yourself that you want to share, or a video that you've seen, something, a TED Talk or something that really influenced your thinking around DEI?
Oh, I think there's so many. I mean, I really enjoyed Matthew Side's book Rebel Ideas. That was a good one. But I enjoy all of his work.
Yeah.
I'm going to think on that. Maybe what we can do as part of sending this out, KK, is put a list together.
Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. I want to talk about what Talking Talent is doing around this space and how it's going around the DEI kind of coaching piece. How it's going? Is this what's it, and what's that coaching look like? Who are you coaching? Who are we coaching?
Yeah, well, I think we're trying to be a bit disruptive in the marketplace, I would say, because I guess one of the things that we've observed is that there's been a lot spent within this industry, and I think it's being written about quite a lot at the moment, isn't it, KK? But billions of dollars been spent, but actually the needle hasn't particularly moved. And I think for us, it's partly because we're just treading water at the surface level here. We're just skating across the surface ice, and we're not actually going below the surface.
Right. Explain that a little bit. I'm not going to let you get away with that. I want to know what that above that treading is all about.
So I think for me, what that looks like, how that is manifested is that organizations have spent a lot of time and effort making people aware of, for example, the fact that we all have unconscious biases.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's another one of those buzzwords, isn't it? Or phrases. We've all got unconscious biases. But I think the challenge with that approach is that it oftentimes starts and ends there. Mm-hmm. We'll do a 1 hour virtual session on unconscious bias to kind of make you aware what some of your biases may be.
Right.
And then in a way, it feels like the organizations are going to start it and stop there. So for me, that feels like we're making people, consciously aware that they have got some challenging behaviors. But then they're saying, okay, well now good luck with that. See what you're going to do. What were you going to do with this feedback?
Imagine, I have to interrupt there. The thing with that little scenario you gave, you put the person out there, and now you've made them feel bad about themselves.
Well, I think sometimes,
and then you very rarely take action.
Yeah, well, I think so. Sometimes it may make the individual feel bad about themselves because they recognize that they've got some biases. Mm-hmm. I think at its most dangerous, it also, in a way, kind of legitimizes that. It says, hey, don't worry, all of us have unconscious biases. This is kind of normal human behavior.
That's true.
So we're all okay here because all of us have them one way or t'other.
Right.
What it doesn't do is say, hey, look, and here's how we need to get you to reflect on changing behaviors so that these biases do not impact on your colleagues, your friends, your family, society, the organizational context that you're in. And that is what I think Talking Talent is trying to change, is going to take people from this awareness that everything is not right, and then getting them to really think intentionally about how they want to be different and how their behaviors and actions can make a strong difference.
Do you want to share with the audience a little bit of what makes us disruptive, how we are disrupting in that space?
Yeah, well, I think there's something around not pulling our punches. I think having really open and honest conversations, but again, creating psychologically safe spaces to have these dialogues. That is so fundamental. I can't overstate that, and it takes time. And then I think secondarily, because we've got a lot of psychologists and coaches in our team, we're experts in behavioral change.
Yes.
So we're experts at taking leaders and saying, okay, well, look, if this is the current state, this is how people are experiencing the system now. Your leadership style is part of that. Now, what are some of the small things we can do that are going to add up to making a big difference here? And let's work in on some of those behavior changes over time.
Right.
And the key is, getting our clients to allow access to those leaders on multiple occasions, so that it's not just a one-off. Right. I think, again, that's a big differentiator, is how do you take people through this kind of behavioral change?
Right. And for those listening, are organizations being more receptive to this type of discussion, this type of dialogue?
So we're going full circle here a little bit. So again, I think one of my advantages as being a white man and having other men on our team is having this balance of who comes through the door to have these conversations. And I love working with Anu. I'm really excited about working with Donna, our new head of inclusion here in the UK, because I think having a diverse team walking through the door, some of whom look like the majority in leadership roles, others who represent diverse individuals that we're working with, I think is really key, because I think it can help accelerate open conversations, and can help get you there faster, rightly or wrongly.
Right. Well, it is right. It is right. I mean, we can look at that and we can unpick that, and we can be very critical of having diverse people walk in the room with you. But we can also see that this organization is walking the talk, and that's important.
Yeah.
That's very important. When I'm sitting in on a business call, or I'm obviously one of the executive coaches in the organization, and I come into the room and I show up in the room, to me, that makes sense. Had a experience a week ago with a young woman, super successful woman on Capitol Hill. I mean, wow. And she's a Black American woman like myself. I'm here in the UK. And I opened my mouth and I said something she could relate to. I was talking about the great Maya Angelou, and she just threw her hand up. She was, I need to work with her. And she did that, and we arranged that. And now I'm coaching her. That was in a group setting. It's important to see us. It's important to have us walk in the room, because that is that, say there's someone who's aspiring for that position, or in that position within an organization, a higher position, leadership role, we see ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And then
exactly.
the effect on others. It's like, okay, there's a Black woman. She's awesome. That's great. Yeah, we got a Black woman on our team. We got that, right? It just opens the excitement.
Well, exactly. And in the same way, when we've got, white men who are at the front of the room alongside diverse colleagues leading the conversation around ED&I, it means that the majority may have a different conversation with us that may elicit a different dialogue in the room. I mean, one of the things I'm really mindful of at the moment is, one of my experiences, I think, setting up Talking Talent early on is that as part of the originally diversity and inclusion efforts, organizations oftentimes set up employee support groups.
Yes.
And the employee support group would relate into one of the strands of diversity typically. So you would have a working parents network. You would have a network that looked at race and ethnicity. You have, and sometimes that was even split out into the kind of subgroups within Black and ethnic minority groups, and so on and so forth. What I felt the organization was sometimes doing there is saying, hey, we've got a problem with gender diversity. You're the senior women and you've got this women's network. So look, we'd love for you to kind of come up with the ideas as to what it is that we should be doing differently. And then if you could implement those too, that would be great.
Right.
And I always used to go into our clients and say, hey, look, this is not a problem for the women's network to own. This is a problem that's created by the system and the leadership of that system. So let's just keep it real here.
Yeah.
You can't expect these individuals to unravel the problem that the organization and the system has created.
Absolutely.
So similarly, one of the things I do worry about is this kind of stampede to hire new heads of ED&I. And one of the things is this kind of real push to have Black heads of ED&I. And I worry a little bit that, there's this mantle that, we need to do something because of Black Lives Matter. And, we're going to hire a Black head of ED&I and we're going to give the problem to that function without really giving them proper leadership support or resources to actually elicit any change.
Right.
And I have real fear for that. So we're thinking a lot about how we support people in that ED&I role, that function, to help them kind of say, well, look, this isn't about me waving a magic wand.
Thank you. That's very important. That's very, very important because that has been, how I've been seeing things over the year. And, all you have to do is spend some time on LinkedIn and you're seeing it. It's like, or you just go into the job section and they're hiring ED&I and it is just going on and on and on. It's like, are you just doing what people have done for years, which is that tick box exercise? And then you put it all on that person. It doesn't work. It's like, hey, well, we tried, but we'll just go back to what we were doing before.
Yeah.
That's not fair. And that person coming in, that person of color, ethnic diversity coming in is not going to be psychologically safe.
Well, it's the fear is it kind of sets it up for failure, doesn't it? Rather than success, which is not fair.
Because you guys, Talking Talent, have hired a Black woman here in the UK. And I think she's Indian Asian woman in the US.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you've actually brought that up. Because I think that's important because people will see that there's a new hire here and there's a new hire there from an ethnic diverse background.
Yeah.
But you've given some real good thought to that.
Well, it's interesting because through that interview process, there were, more than one candidate who we interviewed. We interviewed someone in the States who was, a senior practitioner who come from one of the tech firms. And his words were, it's almost not enough to be a gay white man within the ED&I space in the States anymore. It just doesn't cut it. And we had a number of candidates who were kind of frustrated at how many times they were being approached for ED&I roles where, the recruiter had openly said, we're looking for a Black woman.
Right.
And I think it was such a turn off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I got approached many times over the last year. I'm like, well, I don't have strategy experience on that level, but it's still like, no, you should apply. It's like, no, that's a setup.
Well, when I think sadly, I wonder whether some of these roles are just going to be kind of window dressing. I hope not.
Yeah, that's why I say a tick box. Absolutely. It's such a shame. But however, Talking Talent is, we're doing our best to change a lot of things. I mean, this whole space, this whole kind of trying to help change the look of the corporate space and to see more people of color, we know women, but more people of color into these senior level roles. That's a big, big ask. It's a big challenge. It's a challenge ahead. How committed are you?
Well, I mean, I think it's a super exciting challenge. We've been talking for years because of our work around gender at that intersection between gender and race.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking with clients around that for a long time. 3 years ago, we started having conversations around race and ethnicity. Mostly because a few of our clients have moved the agenda so far on gender. They've got 45-50% of their senior management in as women into those level of roles, that they were starting to, with our nudges and support, refocus around the race and ethnicity, because we could see that the intersection between gender and race was a real problem for them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all in. There's so much more to be done. And, I'm really proud of the work that we do here at Talking Talent. It means a lot to me, and I know to my colleagues that, we're leaving the world in a better place.
That's fantastic. Well, look, I want to end it there because that was such a nice little leaving the world in a better place. And isn't that really what, coaching is all about, is leaving the world, meaning individuals, in a better place than they were before. Thank you, Chris, so much. Mr. Chris Parke, CEO of Talking Talent. It's a pleasure to have this conversation. It's a pleasure to be one of your executive coach directors here and kind of forging this plan of change, this little plan of change within this big macrocosm of this glorious world we're living in. Again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, KK.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This podcast has been brought to you by Talking Talent. We're a coaching organization that helps you develop, advance, and retain your talent. Together, we can create a more inclusive culture where your people and your organization can thrive. You can visit us online at talking-talent.com. That's talking-talent.com. If you liked what you heard today, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Thank you.